I arrived in Germany in March and it was still cold. So I was really glad that I had purchased a new coat. Evelyn Wynn, Ted's sister, helped me pick it out, and it was long with a warm lining and maroon colored. And it served me well as we were walking around the streets of the German city with Ted in his uniform. We caught the bus then for Stuttgart, and from there another bus to the little town of Bobblingen, which was where our house was. Bobblingen was right by Panzerkaserne, and the house that we lived in, that Ted had rented, was at the back of a house, a bigger house, on 8 Tannenbergstrasse in Bobblingen, a suburb. And out the back gate by our house was a walkway through the woods, a path that led to a back gate of Panzerkaserne. So Ted was able to walk to work every day, and I was able to walk there to the PX or commissary. It was very convenient. The house itself was not big. It was only 2 rooms, and it was probably, we were told at one time, some kind of a chicken house or pigeon house or something, but it had been reconverted to rent out and was rented by airmen or soldiers who were bringing their families over from America. The big room had a couch that made a bed. It had a large chest where you could hang clothes with also some drawers for storage space. It also had a small table with 2 chairs and a coal-burning stove for heating. The smaller room was the kitchen, which has probably been added on, and it had a small table in it as well, with a little storage under it for pots and pans, or the small wash tub that served as a bathtub and place to do your laundry. There was a sink on one wall with just one faucet and cold water. Then on the back wall was a 4-foot-long bunch of shelves. On top of it was a 2-burner hot plate, and underneath was storage for canned goods or dishes or so forth, and it had like kind of a curtain that covered the front of it. In the middle of the floor of that room was a cutout with a trap door, and when you opened it, there was a metal can about 2 foot by 1 foot and about 1.5 feet deep. This served as a cold box. You could put milk, butter, cheese, and they would stay cold in there for several days. There was no icebox or refrigerator. And of course, there was no bathroom. We had an outside facility which had been added on at the back of the house. But it served us well for the 1.5 years that we were there before we came back home. We had nice times walking in the woods, and we also once rented a Mercedes with this couple, another couple from Texas that Ted had met who was in his company. Their last name was Crockett. I can't remember the first name now. But they had a child, and together we took a ride one weekend in this rented Mercedes all through the mountains and Audubon, looking at the scenery, stopped at a large town and looked at the Bahnhof and different things, and it was really nice, just like tourists. And then back to the camp on Monday morning. Ted had to work a lot because being in Signal Corps, when anybody went on maneuvers, the Signal Corps had to go along to furnish communications. So if the infantry went, the Signal Corps went. If the tank corps went, they went along to furnish communications, whoever went. So he was gone more than he was home, 2 or 3 days in a row, but then he'd be back mostly for weekends. Actually, one TDY he was sent on, he was gone over a week. They went to Austria because the troops were moving out of Austria, and Austrian government was taking back over, and they were bringing supplies back to West Germany. And that was kind of a crazy thing. When they got there, the lieutenant, who was pretty new, but mostly, wanted to show he was in charge, they found the colonel's possessions all boxed up and ready to go. And there was a deep freeze that was locked. And he said, "Oh my, we must furnish electricity to this deep freeze to make sure that everything does not spoil before we get there." So they had to makeshift some way to do that and got it hooked up. Ted said we did it, and it started freezing again. And then we put it in the deuce and a half and with the other stuff that we were bringing back to Germany. And when we arrived where the colonel had been stationed at his place, we're bringing stuff in, he said, "Why is this deep freeze cold?" And the lieutenant saluted him and said, "Sir, I made sure that it had electricity so nothing would spoil." And he said, "Oh my goodness." He said, "We had undone everything, and it's packed with records and books and all. And when they opened them up, those 78 records were just crisp and broke in your hands." That was a learning for the lieutenant. And that was an interesting tale that Ted had about that trip. My time was taken up with just taking care of the house. I had to do laundry by hand, but I could hang the clothes out on a clothesline behind the big house. And when I would go out there, Herr Wobold would be working in the yard, and he would always greet me with "Wie geht's?" And I would say, "Wie geht's" back, or "good," I'm good. And then he would say, "Wie geht's Tio?" which is what he called Ted. And I said, "Tio is good," and that was our conversation almost every day. And then eventually, after the baby was born, and his name was Ted Jr., he asked me, "Wie geht's?" "Good." "Wie geht's Tio?" "Good." "Wie geht's the baby?" I said, "Baby, good." And finally one day he said, "Wie geht's?" "Good." "Wie geht's Tio?" "Good." "Wie geht's baby?" I said, "Good." "Was ist Name the baby?" He wanted to know his name. I said, "Tio." He said, "Nein, Papa, baby Name." And I said, "Papa es Tio, baby es Tio." And he said, "Ach so, Tio Littly." From then on, it was "Wie geht's du?" "Wie geht's Tio?" "Wie geht's Tio Littly?" And so that was our conversation almost every day. But he was a nice man. Well, my pregnancy progressed. My cleaning up was mostly done in the wash tub that was not big enough to get in, but it was sponge baths. But every Saturday, I took the bus down into Bobligan where there was a bathhouse, and you could use all the hot water you wanted and stay as long as you wanted for a certain amount of money. And I took advantage of that. I would soak in the tub, wash my hair, do all that, and get a good cleaning once a week. And then that made do for most of the time. And even after the baby came, Ted would stay with the baby while I went to the bathhouse. Well, once when Ted was on TDY, he had to go to Heidelberg. And this was not really convenient because it was already the first part of August. And the baby due date was August 12th. And when I got there, and had to go into Stuttgart for my OB checkups. Discovered that there were 5 OB/GYN doctors at the 5th General Hospital there. And in April, I saw one doctor. May, I saw a different doctor. June, I saw still another doctor. And then July, a 4th doctor. And of course, wouldn't you know, when I went in to have the baby, the only doctor I had not seen was the one on duty. But they gave me good service. But what happened with Ted being on TDY, to Heidelberg, something was wrong, and they were there all week fixing it. And started home on Friday, about the middle of the month, which was around my due date. And he said he was speeding in the deuce and a half, which was a no-no for the Army GIs. So he kept looking back over his shoulder to make sure that the police weren't after him. But he was trying to get home for fear that I was going into labor. Well, he did this all the way from Heidelberg to Kasern. And the next day, his neck was a little swollen, sore. Well, when he reported to the roll call that morning, the sergeant said, "Babb, fall out." He said, "Sir," he said, "your neck's swollen. I think you've got the mumps." "No, sir, I've had the mumps." "Fall out, Babb." And they called and they sent him to the dispensary. They sent him to Stuttgart because they said, "It looks like he's coming down with the mumps on one side of his neck, and it'll probably move to the other." They put him in the hospital in an isolation ward where he was the only one in there, and they slid his food through a trap door in the door. And in the meantime, he said every time an ambulance came in, he could hear it wailing. He would run to the window and look out to see if it might be me coming in to have the baby. Well, they kept him a week. The swelling went down. He didn't come out with mumps. So they finally let him go. And he got home and was there about 3 days, and he was assigned to guard duty for the weekend. This was August 28th and 29th. And so on the morning of Saturday morning of August 28th, he reported for guard duty. And he said, "I will tell them you're overdue with a baby, and if something happens, you call or get Wobo to call, use their phone and call the Kasern." And he gave me the number, and they'll come and get me. So I said, "Well, I don't have any pains that I know of, just my back's hurting a little." Of course, this was my first pregnancy, and I did not know that was probably the first part of delivery. It was the pain in your back. Well, by the afternoon or noon of Saturday, I began to have contractions. And by late afternoon, they were getting closer. So I went to the phone and called, and they said, "We'll get him." And so I waited, and I had the suitcase ready. And in a little bit, he bursts in the door, and he said, "I'm here with an ambulance." And so he grabbed the suitcase and me, and it was August. I didn't need a coat then. And out the door we went, and they put me in the back of an ambulance on a stretcher, and that was quite a ride from Bobbligan all the way into Stuttgart over those cobblestone streets, bouncing on that ambulance. But we got there, and they checked me in, and I said, "Yes, she's going to be, but she's not progressing that much, so we need y'all to walk around some." So we walked the halls, Ted and I, and then about 5 o'clock, or maybe it was 7 by then, they told him to go to the waiting room, or he could go to the cafeteria, get something to eat. They were taking me to the delivery section. And so I went into this room, which was recovery room, right next to the delivery room. There were 3 other ladies in there who were waiting to have their babies. And the nurse would come in and check us periodically. And during the night, each of those 3 went on. Finally, I was in there by myself. And about 5 o'clock on Sunday morning, she comes in and she said, "Let me see how you're doing. When I say push, push." She said, "Push." And I pushed, and she said, "Stop pushing, stop pushing." And she started wheeling me and hollered, "Call the doctor, stat." And so I went into delivery, and Ted was born. He was born with his face up instead of the top or back of his head as normal. And that was probably why it took longer. And I asked the doctor what caused that. He said, "Well, it just happens sometime." He said, "Maybe he wanted to see where he was going." And I thought, well, that might be true. Anyway, because of that, he was really wrinkled. His face was scrunched up. And he looked like a little old man, wrinkled up man. And when Ted came in, they had gone in to wake him, and he had fallen asleep on like a 2-seater couch with his legs hanging over the end of the arms. And when they said, "Mr. Babb, you can come in now and see the baby and your wife," his legs had gone to sleep and he couldn't get up. And he said, "I can't get up, my legs are asleep." So the nurse grabbed his legs and punched on them and then whipped them around. And finally he got up, and they took him by the nursery, and then they brought him in to see me. And I said, "Isn't he beautiful?" And Ted looked, "Well, he's okay." I said, "He'll get better," the doctor said. "He'll straighten up." He didn't look as sweet as most newborn babies, but he was beautiful, and he got sweeter every day. And Ted said, "I'm going to go send a cablegram to your mom and dad and my mom and dad." So when he came back, he said, "I could send one with 5 words for just 50 cents each, or it costs so much more the longer you got over that." So he said, I wrote, "Son born, all well, Ted Jr." He said, "That way," I told him, "it's a boy, y'all are both good, and the baby's name, for 50 cents each." Well, they kept me 4 days. And at the end of that 4 days, they sent me home. And this time, it was Ted coming after me, and we went by a taxi with the baby. And I didn't ask how much that cost, but when we got home, he was 4 days old. He weighed 5 pounds, 15.5 ounces. And he was 18 inches long. Not a real big baby, but had all the necessary parts in the right places. And he began to grow really fast when my milk came in, because he was a breast baby. 2 days after we came home, when he was 6 days old, Teddy got colic. I didn't know what it was then because he was such a new baby, but I just knew he cried all day and nothing satisfied him. He wouldn't take water from the bottle. He wouldn't go on the breast, just cried. And by the end of the day, when Ted came home from work, I was crying also. And he walked in the door, and I'm crying, and the baby's wailing, and he looked shocked. And I told him, I don't know what's wrong. He's sick. He won't eat. He's cried all day. And so he took him and he walked with him a little. He continued to cry. After about an hour, he said, I'm going to go call the doctor. So he went and knocked on the door of the Wobel's home. And Herr Wobel said, Was ist los? And he said, Telephone. And he said, Ach so, Babb? He called him Babb. Yes, Theo, Babb. The baby is cronking. And he said, oh, the baby cronking. Oh, and he opened the door, and he called his wife, and they got the telephone, and Ted called, and he got a doctor at the hospital, and he told him all of it, and he said, Babb, is this your first baby? And he said, yes, sir. He said, well, let me tell you this. You got lots of nights of crying ahead of you. And sounds like the baby has colic. What will maybe settle him is some weak tea. In the meantime, Frau Wohlberg in the background kept saying, Finkel tea, Finkel tea. And I found out later that meant some weak tea would help settle the baby. She knew, but I didn't know what Finkel tea meant, but when the doctor said weak tea, so we tried that, and he settled down. And after that, I think my milk came in good, and he began to grow, and he loved his bath. He got a bath every day. When it began to get cold, we would put coal in the stove and warm up the house so that it would be warm enough for his bath. And when he got where he could sit up, he really would splash and beat the water. And I enjoyed bathing him. And I also washed his diapers by hand and all that. But that led to something else. My hands began to break out. They broke out with eczema. The doctor said it was from the detergent and of washing so much the diapers and so much laundry that I was doing by hand. And so he said it was not going to get better. It would spread up my arm if I didn't quit. And so that presented a new problem. When Ted and I discussed it, and he gave me salve to wear and the gloves to wear over the salve so I could handle the baby. We knew there was a laundry downtown, and we would see if we could get the laundry down there. But not speaking enough German, I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to go. But I had a friend who was from the Midwest, and she was of German descent, and she had spoken German at home some, so she understood a lot of words and could speak German a little bit. So she agreed to go with me. So we went down to the laundry, and I talked to the man that ran the laundry and about a diaper service. He said, we don't have diapers, and no. And I said, oh, I have the diapers. I had 7 dozen diapers that I had been sent from a baby shower. And so I had enough to do the baby, and they would wash the dirty ones and then the clean ones. Bring them back clean and take the dirty back as they went. And so he agreed to try it, and he would come on Tuesdays and Fridays, and he would bring the clean diapers on Tuesday, pick up the dirty ones. Friday he'd bring those back and pick up the dirty ones. And it worked so good that all of a sudden, every American girl living on the economy there in Tannenberg said, "What? Where are you getting that?" Well, I'm having to wash mine, And so they made arrangements, and pretty soon the laundry had about 6 stops when they'd come up to Tannenberg, and I think it helped their economy with having the American women with the diaper service that we got started because of the eczema. My hands did clear up, but it took a while. But I was very careful with the baby. I wasn't sure that it would go to his skin, but with tender skin, I didn't know, and I didn't want to be sure that it was something that spread. So they finally got well, and Teddy grew, and he got his first letter from America. It was written by Ted's mother, and she said, "Hello, little boy," and we sure are anxious to meet you. And a nice, sweet letter that she wrote him. And she said, we had thought about maybe we might get another girl in the family because she just had one daughter and she'd had 3 sons after that and only one other grandson. But that's all right because we only know how to buy guns and scabbards anyway. And she said, I sent you a package. And when we opened the package, it was a pair of size 6 months blue jeans and a plaid shirt and red corduroy cowboy boots. So she sent him at 6 months his first Texas wear, and I think there's a picture of him with that in it. And it wasn't long before he got so strong that he would pull up and trying to stand. And by 5.5 months, he was pulling up and standing at the couch. Wanted to do everything fast, I guess, to see where he was going. We had wonderful time with him. And Ted was working hard, and I was keeping the house. And when Thanksgiving came along, or a little before Thanksgiving, one of the guys that was moving, a sergeant, said he's moving back to the States, that he had a portable oven that he had purchased with the transformer that went with it to run it on a German 220. If anybody wanted to buy it, he'd sell it. And so Ted bought it. I think he paid $100 for it and brought it home and said, now we can have something besides what you cook on the hot plate. And I began to make pies and cakes. And when Thanksgiving came along, I cooked a turkey. So we had the traditional turkey and Thanksgiving, and we invited the couple, Dieter and Carolyn Witkowski, who were in his, Dieter was in his unit with Ted. We invited them, and so Teddy's first Thanksgiving was in Germany, and there's a picture of me holding him standing by Ted and Dieter and Carolyn at the Thanksgiving table. That was really nice. We had a good Christmas. Ted cut a small tree out in the woods and brought it in, and we decorated it with whatever we could figure out to put on it. Things were not that high. We were fortunate. An American dollar was worth 4 marks then, and so our money was able to purchase a few Christmas things. And one of the purchases I made after I began baking special was a bread knife. And that served also when I would buy the German black bread on the bakery nearby, because we grew to love it, and it was great. And this knife was the sharpest I'd ever seen, and it cut right through that bread. And actually, that was one of the things I packed and brought home with me when we came back. That was a great time until about February came along, and winter set in good. We'd already had some snow and that, but not terrible until then. They said on the radio that it turned out to be the worst winter in 50 years in Germany, and the Rhine actually froze, the Rhine River. And that was how they brought the barges with coal down to heat your house. And everybody's house around there was heated with coal. And pretty soon, all the coal was gone. And we were being as sparing as we could with ours, supplementing little sticks that I could pick up in the woods out behind just to add to the fire and make it go a little longer. About 3 days before, when we were down to like 1 bucket of coal, this lady knocked on my door. She had a little baby girl. She was about a month older than Teddy. She said, "We're completely out of coal. Can I bring the baby and come in?" And I said, "Of course." So she came in and stayed. She stayed all day, and the babies played together, reached for each other. And when her husband came home, he brought a warm blanket and wrapped around them and said, "We'll be all okay together in the bed tonight, all 3 of us." And then he brought her back the next morning. And she stayed there in the daytime for 3 days. And we had put the last of our coal in the stove. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the house it was not that warm because we were sparing with it. Bang, the door, and as I got up to see who it was, it burst open, and there stood Ted Babb with a bucket full of coal. And he said, one barge has got down, and we've been there with a deuce and a half and picked up coal for everybody. And so he said, "I got some more, but here's one for you to put on the stove right now." And so he got enough, and they got enough, and then the other barges started coming once they broke through with that one. But we weren't really sure about that. And it lingered a long time on into March, and we were supposed to have, we had planned a trip to Birch's Garden to see all of that stuff in southern Germany, but it got canceled and all because of the bad weather. And we said, maybe we'll get a chance to go before we go home. His time of duty would be up in May. And this was around the middle of March. He opened the door, came in, and he said, there was a ship that broke the rudder in the North Sea because of all the ice and had to come back to port. And they 3,000 men were put off and sent home on planes and all. And it's waiting there to be loaded and go back to the States to bring 3,000 more back over here. And we have 1 week to get ready to leave. All we can take is 1 trunk, whatever you can get in that trunk. And we have 1 week. So, with a baby, we had to be very sparing about what we chose to bring back. But I did bring my bread knife. He found somebody else that wanted to buy the oven, so he sold it, and we sold the small baby bed we had purchased and a stroller that we had purchased for Teddy. And all we took was all the diapers, because there weren't paper diapers at that time. And figured if we had to, we could throw one away now and then, get back to the States. And so after the week was up, we left with our trunk, and I had the suitcase that I'd come over in filled with what I needed to wear and some of the baby things that we would need. And then he had his duffel bag, and we took a taxi from Tannenberg into Stuttgart, and there we loaded on the train, and we rode the train from Stuttgart to Bremerhaven, and we had like a sleeper thing that they put down at night that we slept in the one night on the way. And we arrived in Bremerhaven, and they put us in a barracks, and we were there one night. And the next day, they loaded all our stuff and us, and when they got on board, Ted was, rank at that time was E5, which was like a sergeant. And they didn't know what E5 was. It was pretty new. It was something new for electrical workers and engineers and that sort of thing. They didn't know that. They thought maybe it was something like a master sergeant. And so they put him in an officer's billet with 2 lieutenants. And they put me and the baby in a ward with 3 other women and 1 other baby. They separated us on the ship. And then they called all the men, and they said, because we're underhanded, was what we usually had, the troops that we could pull. We need workers in the laundry, in the cafeteria, whatever. So, or the mess, I guess is what they called it. And so they took volunteers. So Ted said, I thought, well, I'll go volunteer at the mess, so that way we'll be sure to have enough food to eat. So that was interesting. He said, they told him, what to do, and he said after about the 3rd day, he told me, he said, today they said, strip to your waist, take off everything including your undershirt, waist up, and go in and wash your whole body. And they gave them and so then they came in when they were clean. They said, now today the dessert is pudding, butterscotch pudding. Butterscotch is the one thing that will not unwind and mix up in the mixer. So you have to get in there with your hands and just squeeze it and mix it up. That's why we had you to wash. It's a deep barrels, and you'll be putting your hands down in there like nearly to your armpits. And Ted said, I looked at the other old boy that was working with me, and the hair under his armpits was about 4 foot long. He said, I thought, all right, I guess 4 inches, but he said 4 foot. He said, I'm not eating butterscotch tonight. And he told me, whispered, don't eat the butterscotch. Well, that was a funny story from that. Anyway, he worked in the mess the entire time. And when we got, it took us 9 days. The thing for me was that when we went through the English Channel, it was so rough with the way, and I got seasick. And I couldn't keep anything on my stomach, and consequently, I couldn't give any milk. And so my breast dried up, and Teddy was not happy, but he was weaned because there wasn't anything else. And finally, he took the bottle because that was all he had to eat. And so I finally, after about 4 or 5 days, began to feel better. But I was very seasick because once we got through the channel, it already started, east little bit of waves would just bring it all back again. It was not a real pleasant trip for me with a crying baby and being seasick. But finally, the last about 4 days, I felt better. It took us 9 days to cross, and we sighted Rhode Island. Then we sailed leisurely down to the New York harbor because we couldn't land until the next day because of all of this. So we sat in the harbor overnight waiting for our turn to be unloaded. And then they put us on a bus and sent us to New Jersey, to Fort Myers. And that was where Ted was discharged. And by this time, it was Friday, late Friday, when he got his discharge, Easter weekend, we tried every place to get a flight to Texas. Nothing was available. Finally, we got a call that there had been a cancellation. We could get to San Antonio via Houston. It would go to Houston first and then come up to San Antonio, get that far. And Ted said, well, let's take that. And then Bob, his brother, could come to San Antonio and pick us up. So we got on the flight, and it was very full. We had to hold the baby, each one of us, all the time, which he was not happy after traveling for 2 weeks from the time we left our house in Bobligan till we arrived in New York. And but he would stand in the aisle some when it wasn't busy, and other people would smile at him, and he was a happy baby if he just left him alone, you know. And so when we got to Houston, they said something about anyone aboard wanting the plane for San Angelo, there was room on it. And Ted said, well, if we weren't going to San Antonio, we could take this and go on into San Angelo. But our luggage is there. And she told the stewardess, and she said, well, let me see if I can get you to 2 seats. Yes, they had them. And she said, if you give that luggage guy a $20 tip, I bet he'll get your luggage off of there and get it onto the plane to San Angelo. And so Ted said, well, we'll try. If not, we'll have to go back to San Antonio to get our luggage. So anyway, we took the 2 seats to San Angelo, and he gave the guy $20, and he said that guy was throwing luggage here and there to get to ours, and finally got it off. We got it on the plane, and when we arrived in San Angelo, he picked up the phone and called, and his brother Bob answered. And he said, Bob, it's Ted. Where are you? He said, we're at Mathisville. Come and get us. Mathisville? You mean you're home? Yes. And so, of course, he said, and then everybody suddenly got called. His mother, Dad, they called my mom and Dad, said they're back. And we arrived at the Babb's house just as my mom and Dad and all my brothers and sisters were driving in. And there we were, all of us. And Teddy didn't owe any of these people. They all wanted to hug him and kiss him. And he wasn't having any of it after 2 weeks of traveling. He got this glare on his face. And he sat down. Finally, we just put him in the middle of everybody was sitting in a circle all around him. And they would, Teddy boy, and saying his name, and he was just looking from one to the other. That was our trip home from Germany. But we were glad to be home, and Ted was now out of the service, except he would be serving in the reserves for 6 more years to complete his 8-year time. And we were back in Texas. God bless Texas.